Hey, welcome to Charismindful. I'm Dr. Amy Miltich,
I'm Matthew Hill.
and today we have a special guest, Dr. Arletta Brinson, who was my boss, but really more of a transformational leader in Atlanta, in Fulton County Schools. One of my first school site jobs.
Okay.
Get more feedback from the headphone here, so I'm trying to adjust to it. But I wanted to have a conversation with Arletta. I spoke with her last week kind of about everything that was going on in our nation, and she is one of my most trusted colleagues, and we had a great conversation, and I wanted to share it here.
And it was good to reconnect with you last week.
It was so good. Yeah, I feel like we had a great conversation, and I love when we have a conversation, you have a conversation with somebody, and it feels like no time has really passed.
That's true. That's true. And that's been a long time ago. It's 99 to 2003 is when I was in Fulton.
Well, and I think I started maybe in 2000 and left in maybe 2003. I mean, you were still there when I left. So,
Okay.
Yeah, so a while, almost 20 years. Whew.
Thanks for reminding me.
I know, right? So, let's just kind of pick up, the conversation from where we left off. I mean, when I texted you, I was like, I'm just sad about everything that's been happening. And you were just such a wealth of information about kind of historically where we've been and how some of that has changed and how not much of it has changed. So tell me a little bit about your experience with it, because I know I mentioned on the call that even though I work for you and you're my boss, and I just, have always admired you and thought you were such a great leader, it really didn't occur to me until a week or so ago that you likely had to work a lot harder than me to get your PhD and to get to the position that you were in. And I felt like you had some really interesting insights that I hope you can share.
Okay. I'm in my 60s. I grew up in Atlanta. I'm just going to give you a little context. So that means I grew up in very segregated Atlanta. My elementary and high school were all Black. And I went to Spelman College, which is a historically Black college and university. So that was a wonderful experience. I was a granddaughter. My mother had actually attended Spelman as well. And I guess my first real encounter with full-fledged integration was at Georgia State University. I entered the master's program there, we were talking about 1974. And my very first class, I shall never forget, was an introductory class. It's an overview of the Counseling and Psychological Services Department. And the very first thing that the professor said to the survey class was that in past years, there would be some of you who would not be sitting in this room, and that there were other universities in the area. And he started with Atlanta University. Well, of course, Atlanta University is a historically Black college and university. Mm-hmm. And so immediately, right, wrong, or other, I, as an African-American woman, heard that as I'm not particularly welcomed in this environment.
Right.
But just coming straight from Spelman and the days of the revolution and thinking that we could do everything and change everything, that statement did not deter me. In fact, it only motivated me. It saddened me because never in my academic career had someone started off with the assumption that I didn't belong. And so that set the stage for, okay, these are the cards that are being dealt here, and we're going to play these cards and play them well. And needless to say, I stayed there about 10 years and wound up getting my PhD there. That was just one experience Certainly, I had a lot of great experiences, a lot of really great professors there, met lifelong friends, Black, white, and other at Georgia State. But that's sort of the microcosm. Now I think we call those things microaggressions, where people just sort of pick at you and nick you and that sort of thing. In fact, I was laughing today with my cousin, and I was talking about someone I had seen on TV, a Caucasian guy, relatively young. And I was saying I was a little saddened to hear some of the comments that he was making. And I laughingly said to my cousin, I said, and he was so articulate, because that's that becomes the ultimate insult for African Americans to hear. That's, oh, they're so articulate. But often I have been accused of being so articulate at Georgia State and other places. But I guess when I gave you my background in terms of just education, because I was very solidly grounded in who I was, what my skill set was, a lot of those microaggressions I absorbed, but was not completely deterred by them. And I guess one of the things I often worry about and wonder about are how many others who may not be as grounded, who get deterred by things like that. But
well, and it's so, I mean, it's not subtle when it happens to you, I'm sure, but it's insidious in the way, like just that little, random, what might seem to someone as a random comment, how hurtful that really is.
Yeah, and it's cumulative. And I think one of the things you asked, how was I doing? And I think I quoted Fannie Lou Hamer, who said she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that has been the overwhelming response and reaction of people in my circle, is that they're just sick and tired, and sad, sad that some of the promises of the civil rights era and different eras has not completely manifested itself.
Yeah.
When I look at the staff at Fulton County and Psych Services, we were a great microcosm. I think I mentioned to you, though, again, the sadness for us as a society and systems, when we talk about the systemic racism. I hired in 2000 the first 3 African-American male school psychologists in Fulton County.
Which
in
is
2002.
just crazy. Yeah, I mean, that just, when you told me that the other night, it floored me, because it never occurred to me that you hiring them, that they were the first, African-American men in our department in Atlanta, Georgia. That floored me.
Yeah. So,
and they were amazing.
They were not, I'm sorry.
Said they were amazing, or are, I'm sure, still amazing, but when I was there, they were great.
Yes, they were very accomplished in their own right, and as you said, they have gone on to do great things in education, not only in Fulton but in DeKalb and Atlanta now, and have promotional positions and that sort of thing. But that goes back to just saying where we are and where we aren't as a society.
Yeah.
And but again, that microcosm of, well, that was just a magical moment in time when we were in psych services together. We had the perfect boss in Nan. Dr. Dolinger was, you talk about a transformational visionary leader. It was pre-recession, so there were resources and supplies and the creativity to do what we needed to do. So that's the kind of environment, the kind of world, the kind of hope that we had all embraced, and that would replicate itself over and over. And in a lot of ways it has, in some ways it has not.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that, where we're located, you mentioned, Atlanta is just such a unique place for integration and diversity and, acceptance. And I don't know that, where we are now, in Tennessee is exactly in the same place. And that makes me sad. When I'm out and about and when I'm on the job, it makes me really sad. And sometimes I don't really know what to do about it and how to approach it. I mean,
And I think you have to trust your intuition on that. Atlanta is a tale of two cities, though. And I think we forget that. Atlanta has one of the greatest wealth gaps in the nation. And there are a lot of systems in Atlanta that are not functioning fully like they should. And I think the difference perhaps in some of the smaller places, and sometimes I'd rather know where people are and what they're thinking up front than to be covert. Because when you look at hiring practices in Atlanta, promotional practices and those sorts of things, everything that glitters is not necessarily gold. So I think whether it's an urban setting or a more rural setting, we still have work to do. And I think that's why courageous conversations like this are so important. And I think that's been part of what's been missing, is that, we have Black and white sometimes been too politically correct and not had tough conversations or not shared our experiences. I think, again, one of the places of just deep grief for me during this period has been talking with my African American male friends or family members. And to a person, they talk about how they've been profiled and, all but arrested and harassed. And literally, guys from 20 to 70 in tears.
wow.
Literally. But the grace of this period is that some of that's been bottled up inside of them and me and so many other people is being brought to light. And so if we can take this as a period of grace to heal and move forward, not prematurely heal, not put a Band-Aid over cancer.
Right. Not saying it's done and let's not talk about it.
Right. Whether black or white, I put up my Black Lives Matter t-shirt and now all is well. No, it's those deeper conversations that I think will be necessary across time. And as some of my friends say, calling a thing a thing. We've been good about not calling some things that were what they really were.
Right.
And it's not from a point of victimization. I'm not a victim. Folk in my circle are not victims, but we do face reality and we do notice. And it's not being paranoid. The example I gave you at the beginning in terms of my introduction to Georgia State, that set a tone. That
Absolutely.
was a fact. Didn't let it deter us, but it was a fact.
Well, it's interesting. Spencer and I were kind of talking about this last night, and Matt was with us. He said that in school it's glossed over, in education, that it's like, oh, that period is done, so there's we just don't talk about it, and there's not an emphasis on how do you move past it and how do you have the conversations. And I listened to the podcast or the YouTube video on Dr. Beverly Tatum and what she was saying about how she went to schools and they didn't have any sort of education on how to have these discussions because they didn't know what to say. And I think, Spencer echoed that, that's the same with his education, is just the same old, don't talk about it, that it's over. We're sick and tired of, why is this still happening? Like, I'm sad about it too, but I don't have the same experience that you do with it because, I'm not of color. It's a reality.
Yeah.
And I feel like we need to, do the best we can to try to move past that.
And again, it's not about trying to beat anybody over their head about any particular issue. But again, it's facing up to the historical facts. I think one of the other things I sent you was, maybe not you, but to another friend, this is what systemic racism looks like. And again, not beating anyone up, but it was like two kids who lived within 3 miles of each other, and they talked about the wealth disparities, but they also gave the historical context for how some of those disparities came about. One was like the GI Bill, and the other one was the Veterans Administration.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Black soldiers, my uncles and those folk who valiantly fought in World War II, could not access the GI Bill for education. Well, we know education is a stepping stone toward a different economic outcome.
Absolutely.
And then the other piece that our little cartoon highlighted was housing. And there were covenants where banks could not give loans to African Americans in certain communities. The covenant was that you could not sell to a Negro these houses. And again, we also know economically that when you can build up a little equity in your house,
mm-hmm.
that becomes, for the middle class, that becomes a stepping stone again toward education and accumulating wealth in other areas. And
yes.
So those two things, while they are removed from my generation, still had economic implications for my parents and then for me, and would have subsequently, other generations. And so it's those kinds of things that I think, again, in a healthy way are being discussed, because it's like the mantra, why don't you pull yourselves up by your bootstraps? Well, guess what? You got a pair of boots and some straps.
Right.
I didn't get either.
When Dr. Tatum was speaking, one of the things that really stuck with me was her quote that privilege is a fact. It's not an insult. So I think, like from my perspective, when you say to another Caucasian person who's middle class or upper middle class, you have privilege, they get really deeply offended, and they get, there's a backlash to that. Well, I worked really hard to get where I am. Well, right. No one said that you didn't work hard. I worked hard to get my doctorate, but the fact is I had certain advantages that other people didn't. Somehow as a community, we have to accept that and use that privilege in a productive way. It's a moral issue. Then it's not so much of the race situation, but do the right thing.
Well, for instance, today is the Poor People's Campaign virtual march by Dr. William Barber. And he's one of my heroes at this particular point in time. He led the moral movement in North Carolina a few years ago. And one of his taglines was, it's not blue or red, Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, Black or white. It's what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
And he was able to build coalitions all the way from, he tells a story like a couple of times he had to go up in the Appalachian Trail and he was a little hesitant. But when he got there, he was able to build coalitions, because at the end of the day, those folk up there needed some health care. They needed access to better schools. Basically, the same things that anybody talks about is just the basic kinds of things. So if you haven't heard of Dr. William Barber, go and Google him and listen to some of his sermons, because he really truly speaks truth to power. And he truly talks about strategies moving forward. I think the whole piece is we want to process, but everywhere I'm listening, what are the concrete things that can happen to move us forward as a society?
And we'll post that link and Dr. Tatum's interview or presentation as well, so people can have access to that. They were just both really, both moving and informative. I enjoyed them. So what are the kinds of things that I know you're very involved with your sorority from Spelman, and you're volunteering a lot. What are some of the things that you're doing that other people can do to help foster this and move things forward in a productive way?
Well, I do a lot of volunteering, that's for sure.
For a retired, you're pretty busy.
I'm pretty busy. Well, I think having courageous conversations, and not just across race, but within race. I'm in another service organization, and a person called earlier, to see how I was doing. And I told her, tired of this, but I'm okay. And she asked, what could she do? And I said, talk to that coworker who makes that racist joke.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to that person who, is misogynistic in their orientation. I think, I'll give an example. I was on a call today, and somebody had done something. It was another service group, basically older than me, so that tells you a little bit about the age of that group. But one person had done something, and one person says, "Oh, we're going to put the dunce cap on you." Well, immediately, I said, we don't do that anymore. And then they kind of chuckled.
Good for you.
Said, that's the teacher speaking up. Yeah, that was a teacher speaking up. And there might have been a time that I would just let, that's just a bunch of little old ladies, let it slide. But again, not beating folk up, but again, just calling things out. That's an inappropriate comment.
Yeah.
That's a mindset that we don't need. So back to your question, what can we do? I think fundamentally, that's one of the most important things that we can do. I think looking at policies, I'm not as involved locally as I should be. So that's probably one of I'm going to get more involved locally at a political level. For various and sundry reasons, I kind of had my hands full a few years ago and wasn't as much involved. But, what's the adage? All politics are local. That we've got to get involved with our local politics and politicians. Mm-hmm. And black, white, other, hold people accountable. People will come and campaign, and then they go away. That's because we let them. But if you show up to board meetings and say, in this curriculum, we need to not call enslaved African workers. They were enslaved.
Yeah.
They call them workers?
Yes. Down in Texas, I guess about 4 or 5 years ago, McGraw-Hill, I don't know which company it was, but anyway, one of the large publishing companies referenced enslaved Africans as workers. And a mother saw that, and she challenged it all the way up. And I think that there was a rewrite on that. But unless that mother had been vigilant,
to help change the curriculum, then we whitewash that part of history. I know the last couple of days we've been hearing a lot about the Tulsa massacre, and that bit of history will be written into the Oklahoma's curriculum people were talking about. You know, and how do you have something like that happens and nobody knows about it? So I think it's, you know, it's education, it's conversation, it's learning to be a little more compassionate. All those C's, huh? 3 C's.
Right.
You
know, and empathy, as psychologists, we always talk about that empathy, but you know, it's important to cultivate that all along. And I loved what you said in our conversation the other night about working with the up and coming generation, and that, you know, some of the older generation, not that you can't teach a dog new tricks, but sometimes
a little harder,
a little more difficult. So,
well, what I have enjoyed in terms of watching some of your posts and our conversation is how you are rearing compassionate, thinking children who evidently question the status quo and question things. And I think that's, if we have any hope, it has to be hope for the next generation to do what we didn't do, as well as we needed to do it. Now, we did some good things, because when I think about my grandparents' generation, and when I think about the stories that my mother told, and things like she participated in a march down from Atlanta University's Spelman Morehouse, Morrisboro, and Clark students with a professor, Dr. Baycoat, to go to register to vote. And this is in the 40s.
Wow.
And the way she described it, they had to take some type of literacy exam.
So you come from that line too.
Matt has some responses. I'm loving his body language.
I mean, it's fascinating. I had culture shock of my life when I moved from Lewiston, Maine in 1978, a week before the blizzard of 78, and woke up in Marietta, Georgia.
Okay.
I went, yes.
You were how old?
I was 11 years old. And I was the only gringo on my street. They were all French Canadians.
In Maine.
In Maine. And yes, not in Marietta. I went to Dodgen Middle School. It was the first time I heard, there are no racist jokes in Lewiston, Maine. There's just a bunch of white Canadians. And so I've been doing a lot of history and listening to a lot of things, and all of a sudden I'm coming from Maine, and all of a sudden Marty Camner, I hope he's still around. I mean, who knew that I would remember my gay middle school English teacher for Georgia history, who had a mustache like the Village People. I mean, God love Marty. He's like, okay, we're going down to the cyclorama, and we're going to go down and learn about the Civil War. And all of a sudden I'm learning about Georgia history going, why? And the fact that I've enjoyed listening to this, and I can't imagine how sick and tired you are, because I have had numerous conversations. The hardest people for me to reach are the people who look like I do. They take things very deeply on an ego level, that they worked really hard, and everybody can work hard. And the reality is, it's hard to pull yourself up by the bootstraps when you have no boots.
Yeah. And I think that's so true for all of us. Again, growing up in the South, you know, one of our field trips was to the cyclorama. But I think we have to learn from the lessons of history. We've got to know, and again, not the sanitized version, not the romanticized version, but just, can you objectively look at what was going on? I'm sure it's tough to have tough conversations with people because the media has done what it intended to do. If nothing else, if we looked at the essential workers during the COVID hoax or COVID pandemic, or however people want to frame it, they were people of color. Whether it was the people at the chicken factory, whether it was the people who were stocking the grocery stores, whether it was the nurses or the doctors, you know, the people of color were represented there. And so the mythology that people aren't workers is, you know, again, that's that medium mythology that gets perpetuated over and over. I tell people, one strategy for myself and others is disconnect some from the media. You know, if you only watch Fox, watch MSNBC a day. And if you only watch MSNBC, go watch Fox a day and see if you can figure out what's the truth in the middle.
That's a tall order, Arletta.
I know.
That's a tall order. You're,
within family friends too.
Fine. Within,
I can't do it.
For the bulk of it, we don't have cable here. We don't have cable, so we don't have it on.
And, you know, at some point you also have to know, okay, I can't do anything with this one. Let me move on to the next one, because it's not happening, you know, and people get defensive and have to maintain their posture, sometimes in the face of all facts. I guess as I've gotten older, I've put less energy in trying to convince folk of what might be, from my perspective, in their best interest, because I can't understand how, as a state, we would not do Medicaid expansion when there are so many sick people in Georgia. So then I just talk to a few folk and say, well, do you know how that can change? These are some strategies that you can use to help change the decision makers. You know, and I tell people, stay focused on policies. Don't focus on personalities. I mean, stay focused on what is your big picture, who and what's going to promote your cause.
It's interesting, you know, in talking with Spencer last night about it, how he said, you know, he's an independent thinker and very bright, and you know, saying you were kind of raised with that legacy of, you know, moving ahead and moving forward and helping people. And I was raised, you know, think for yourself, be independent minded, question things. Those were all, you know, good qualities as I grew up. And so I think, you know, I've passed that on to my children. Hopefully I've passed them up on to them. That's my goal. But, you know, Spencer was saying that, you know, he often deals with children who don't think independently and really just regurgitate what their parents say, when, you know, you've got to be vulnerable as a parent and say, you're not always right. I'm not always right about everything that I tell them. I like to think I am. I always like to think I am, but I'm not. So I'm not sure what to say to him, other than, you know, having those compassionate conversations with other people where he can maybe just plant that little seed of, you know, this is a new generation and maybe things can be different. Maybe, you know, what your parents say isn't, you know, the way it has to be.
The harder we fight against some people, the harder they're going to maintain their position. And to Matt's point, feel ego threatened and defensive and all those kinds of things. So, you know, just choosing your battles, but speaking up when it becomes a issue that just, you know, like, oh, that's enough. You know, we don't need to have any more of this conversation. And sometimes you pay a price.
Going right over the line.
Yeah, you do pay a price.
Right. And what's the saying? Maybe it's a year or two ago, but, you know, do the next right thing.
Oh, okay.
What's the right thing? Yeah, what's the next right thing? If you're seeing something like that happening, or a comment, or you know, someone not feeling validated, right? What's the next right thing? Morally, you know, chances are doesn't involve what's best for you. You know, but.
Yeah. And again, not putting yourself in harm's way. You know, you have to know the context that you're in. You might be able to do some things differently in one city versus another area. You know, you just firmly believe for our country that we are at a moral crossroad. And we've got to figure it out. You know, I'm a religious person, so, you know, we are praying it out, and we've got to work it out and vote it out, and just all, you know, the various strategies. And look back at history. You know, the one thing I was listening to today was somebody talking about the radical king. America has been fed the homogenized version of Dr. King. You know, the kumbaya, I have a dream. But before he talked about the dream, he talked about America had written a check that had come back insufficient funds. And that all he was asking America to do was to live up to its promises. These are the things as a country we have promised. And so that promise needs to be accessible by, you know, by Americans. So.
By all Americans, right? I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
I've listened to quite a bit of Martin Luther King lately, and also I mix it in with Malcolm X and James Baldwin.
Oh,
and,
yes, yes.
Right? That's a holy trinity right there.
That's a holy trinity.
I mean,
holy, but
that's a holy trinity. I think it is. And there's a lot to unpack there between those three historical figures. And, you know, there's just a lot to unpack there. And some of the sermons and things I've listened to, I think, should be required listening. But you know, I'm the only one who likes to listen to that stuff, apparently, amongst my friends. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to keep on listening and keep on talking because, yeah, it's the right thing. And I do feel we're at a moral crossroads for sure. And people are going to dig in their heels, or they're going to be open. And obviously we're praying for openness.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I truly, truly, truly do. When Amy reached out to me, it was like, oh, okay, my school psych babies. They still want to know what Dr. B has to say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, you know, again, I think, again, folk like Nan Hughes set an environment where we could have conversations and we could interact across generations and across race, and, you know, establish relationships and friendships that have endured. And that's a blessing. And again, I think that's the hope. You know, that's what keeps you from giving, even when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's what keeps you from giving up. That there are the Spencers of the world who are, you know, in the next generation, and the Amy's and the Matts and the generation under me who are, and this is just tough stuff to wrestle with. I mean, it's tough. And if you had caught me, let's see, 35 years ago, we may not be having the same conversation that we're having now. Because, you know, I did have the fro out here and all that good stuff like that. And we wrestled with Malcolm and Martin and Baldwin. And I think some days there are more similarities and differences. The philosophy was the same. It was just the methodologies that were different.
Yeah.
And so, you know, but it's good when we can try to figure it out. Again, I don't think if anybody had the magic bullet, we would have already used it. So now we just gotta, you know, make some mistakes, you know, go forward, listen to the heart of people too. You know, like that. Yeah, just listening to the heart of people. And I think sometimes if we can listen to the heart of people, we can get to some movement. I think that, again, that's what Dr. Barber does. He taps into that center that's good and that's right for not just you, but maybe your neighbor.
Yeah.
It's a radical thought these days.
Well, I'm so hopeful that, people will listen to this and be inspired in some way to move forward. And I'm just so grateful to chat with you, but honored to know you and to have worked with you. And that was just such a formative experience for me that I can't thank you enough. So.
And thank you for validating me, because sometimes you wonder, did I make a difference?
Oh my gosh.
So I don't have, like I said, I don't have the answers, but I keep searching.
So you can follow Arletta on Facebook and on Instagram, and we will post links to the articles that she mentioned that we discussed below. And catch us, post any comments, questions that you have. We hope that you enjoyed it and that you watch it. Follow us if you want to hear more. But otherwise, keep planting those seeds, people, because eventually they grow.
Have tough conversations. We love you, whoever you are.
Thanks, Arletta.
Bye.